Okay, we'll get started here. This video is going to be kind of an overview of how our emergency net should operate. And I think it's always a good thing to start off with some basics. And probably the best way of describing our mission as a group is to state that what we're attempting to do is provide community emergency communications, regardless of grid, internet, or cell phone outages. So that's kind of our fundamental purpose. And this video, in particular, addresses the simulated emergency test that's scheduled for October 7th, this coming Saturday, and we'll probably get started at 10 a.m. To kick off the test for this net. Wanted to go back and kind of review some of the basic infrastructure of what we've put together as a group, and what we'll do is we'll take a look at our systems that we have in place. All of these are pretty much individual systems at individual stations, but primarily what we've set up is a system that where the heart of the system is a UHF repeater that we have located at the Treasure Lake Church. And then we have various stations. Some stations that we have, the operator is set up with an HF radio that gives us the long range communication, regional, state, nationwide, in some cases worldwide. And usually, if a station has an HF repeater, it also has a base VHF, UHF repeater. And we have multiple stations. In fact, if you look at our roster, there are 16 hams in our group that have this configuration. And then we have other hams that are have just the VHF, UHF radios, whether it be a base or mobile station or HTs. And all of these radios can also communicate with everyone through the repeater. And there are also ways for non-hams to monitor the repeater. We've sold some Baofangs that were disabled for transmitting, where they could listen to our repeater. They could also listen to our repeater with a scanner. Some of the GMRS radios are set up that can listen to UHF frequencies outside of the GMRS band, and they could be set up to listen to our repeaters. So this is kind of the basic configuration of our infrastructure. The idea being that traffic coming from the outside is passed through the repeater to everybody, which is the purpose of the net, to manage that function. And then if traffic needs to go outside, say something, a signal from some information from this station here that may need some help or something, can be passed through the repeater to one of these stations and then out to whatever external site it needs to go. Now, one of the things that this allows us to do is that we're looking at setting up an interface with GMRS FRS network in our area, that if we had a ham with a VHF UHF radio and a GMRS radio, you could tie in an entire network, a GMRS FRS network, into this and give the GMRS network, which is limited in range because of the UHF repeater that's being used, it would tie that repeater into the system that can go to the regional and state level of communication. So that's kind of the project we're working on next. But when that happens, we'll modify this net a little bit. Okay, we have two nets that we operate. We have a weekly net, which is shown here on the screen, and the purpose of this net is to essentially check the operation of the network we just looked at. It's a chance for the hams to make sure the radios are working properly and set up properly. And the way we go about doing that is that we run a weekly net on Monday nights, and we do kind of a QSY net where we start on the Treasure Lake repeater, the UHF repeater. We call our check-ins, and then we QSY to a VHF simplex frequency, call the same check-ins, make sure everybody's communicating well on VHF, do the same with the UHF simplex frequency, and then we end up on the W3CPA repeater, which is a 2-meter repeater, and end up here for the VHF UHF portion of the net. And we consider the W3CPA kind of a backup repeater for our local repeater. And then on occasion we'll go into the HF frequencies and step through QSY from one frequency to another, just so we get a feel for how we're able to communicate amongst ourselves locally on these different bands. And for 10 meters and 6 meters, you see we pick frequencies that technicians could use, so we can get as many possible stations involved with this. And then on the 17, 15, and 12 meters, it's all the general band or higher. So this is the spreadsheet we use that you can use to check people in. We've got a signal report system so that you enter in the number that the net control feels describes the signal that he's receiving from the station. And then here's the preamble, or the script that's used for a weekly net. And then the second net we have is the emergency net, which is the subject of this video. And there's several different ways or different types of emergencies we might encounter. You can have an anticipated emergency where there's an advance warning that something's going to happen. And then a good example of that would be a blizzard. Sometimes you know a day or more ahead that there's a good chance of a blizzard hitting the area. So that we need to be able to accommodate that type of an emergency. Then there's unexpected emergencies where things just happen, and you have a widespread power outage as an example of that, where nobody really anticipates it, but boom, there it is. And other types of unexpected emergencies could include any sort of hazardous material accident on I-80 or on the rails, or a wildfire, forest fire, something like that, that just could be an emergency situation. And then there's the possibility of an emergency where it just everything goes down and nobody has a clue what it is. And that is pretty much the worst case situation. And for our planning purposes, this is what we set things up so that we could handle the unknown cause where everything's out, there's no information initially, and how do you get started up in something like that. And the reason we do the worst case situation is if you can handle that, then you can handle the other emergency types that aren't quite as stringent. So a general approach to the emergency net is that we recognize the fact that emergencies are unique. rote procedures break down quickly as things change. So, if you have a very structured process that you use and something doesn't happen quite the way you anticipate it, the structured processes can give you a little bit of a problem or a big problem. So what we really need is to have capable and adaptable members on the net that have a general approach, share a common understanding of what we're trying to do, and change and adapt the process that we're using while we're underway. We'll talk about that a little bit. So the thing to do is consider this emergency net as a general starting point. If something isn't working well or conditions change, change the net. And an example I can give on that is that let's say we have an emergency, say a blizzard, and part of the net is to set up a periodic report, a summary of information that's been gathered since the last report. Say for a blizzard in the early stages, that's something you may want to do like once an hour. What this does is you announce that at the top of each hour you're going to give a summary of the information that's been collected, and people can go about and do what they need to do in the emergency, knowing that they can come back, access the net at the top of the hour, and get an update of what's going on. If you have another type of emergency, let's say a nearby wildfire, you may want to do that every 10 minutes. If things are getting close, or just continuously updating the information as it comes in, you need to be able to make those kind of changes. So you don't want a real structured regimen to follow. So what we need to do if an event has occurred, whether it's any of the types of the three that we talked about earlier, an event that we have some notice, or a sudden event, this would be the approach we need to take. So let's say power went out, and first thing we like to ask our hams to do is to get on their repeater and start discussing the situation with those on the repeaters. And then as people know a little bit about what's going on, you can make a determination whether the emergency net should start or not. Now let's say we have a power failure and it's just a couple sections in Treasure Lake. You really don't need to need to start up the emergency net, but you can still use the repeater to keep people posted and find out what's going on. But on the other hand, if you have an event that has a widespread power failure, let's say all of Treasure Lake and Du Bois is down, say the cell phones are down, or some other key part of the infrastructure isn't operating, the grid's down, then that's when you may want to decide to start the emergency net. First thing you need to do is determine who will operate as net control. Now the function of net control is to control the traffic through the net. And the main thing that net control has to do is to make sure that only one station is reporting at a time. If you think about all the stations that could be on the network at the same time, that traffic management is real important. The other thing net control needs to do is to be able to log the information as it comes in, confirms that it's correct, and then repeat it at set times as a report later on. Then you need to determine who will operate as the backup. And the purpose of the backup is that whatever net control is doing, making logs, recording information, and keeping the traffic straight, the backup should be recording the same information and be in a position that if net control has to leave the network for any reason for a period of time, that the backup can pick up net control capabilities. Excuse me. Net control responsibilities, and one of the first things the backup that needs to do when he or she assumes the net control responsibilities is to find someone else to back him or her up. so they can continue monitoring and logging what's going on. And then once that is done, net control is determined, backup's been defined, then you schedule the emergency net start time. And the reason you do that is, let's say it's a blizzard type situation where you may be doing this a day or so before, and then you decide that say you're doing this the day before the blizzard's expected to hit, and then you can set the time tomorrow that you're going to start the net. If it's something immediate, then obviously you can start the net immediately. And then once all this has been done, then you need to communicate this information by all means available. Obviously, you would want to announce it on our repeater, just because we're capable of operating without the grid internet and cell phones and that kind of thing. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't use them if it's available. You need to use all available means to communicate this. You may want to call people on the phone, send them emails, whatever is available to get the word out that the emergency net is starting, and some instructions how to access our repeater. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the paperwork, I guess you would call it, associated with the emergency net. You can find the latest copy of the emergency net information on our group's OneDrive. And this is a screenshot of our OneDrive. If you go to the TLSC Emergency Communications folder on our OneDrive, and this access to this OneDrive is available on every meeting agenda that's set out by the group. I've got a list of different information sources that you can click on, and it'll bring you to this, the one for the group's OneDrive will bring you to this page, and you can select the emergency communications section, and you'll see here the folder that has nets in it. So you double click on that, and this is what pops up. So this is all the different nets that we have, just a lot of different things associated with the net. I don't delete anything. Just memory's cheap. We save everything, but the way we control information is by using the date on it. So what you want to do would be look for emergency net preamble. This one was April 1st, 2020. And if you would look at this screen now, you'll see yet another one that's dated October 2nd, 23. And that would be the one you'd want to use. You'd want to grab the most current one available. So you can download this, open it up on your computer, and do with it what you will. So it'd be a good idea to grab the emergency net PDF file, the most current one, and you'll be in a position to get ready to go. So this is what's in the emergency net preamble. The current one is 10/02/23, and there's 3 pages that are the script and directions for the net, and I'll be going over each one of these pages individually. So you got 3 pages of script and directions. There's a page that has our ham group roster. We'll get to that. There's a page for checking in stations that aren't part of the ham group, and then there are 3 pages of a log sheet where you can record information as you go along. So we'll take a look at each page now. One point, we've done this a couple of times, and I found, this is just my preference, I found that working with handwritten printed copies has been a lot easier to do than entering information on the computer. Now, probably it's my fat finger typing that might be a problem. So what I suggest is that you have a folder with multiple pre-printed copies of this file for easy startup. And I think it's also a good practice to use a new set of forms for each activation. So let's say you have a situation where you're going to be on the air. Say it's a blizzard, things don't happen especially fast then, and you start the emergency net up on say right after the update that you give at the top of the hour. You start a new emergency net. Use your a new form packet and start the net from the beginnings, because you're going to need to check everybody in, and then every hour or 2 hours or whatever your update interval is, you just start a new emergency net. Okay, so this is the script for the emergency net. This is how you'd start it off. And just up here in red, this would be your announcement. CQ to all amateur operators. You're telling them what the purpose of the net is that we're going to be monitoring and passing traffic from the W3 CPA repeater, the Aries networks, and Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, and some digital networks. So this is the function of the net. Kind of the formatting here, the script, the words you actually say, and you don't have to read it exactly. I mean, just as long as you're comfortable with it. But the script is dark black, bold type, and then the directions are shown in the gray. So the first thing you want to do is identify that the net is either a drill or an actual emergency. This Saturday it'll be a drill, hopefully anyway. And then you identify yourself. You give your call sign, both by letters and numbers and phonetics, your name, where you're located, and then you identify the date, the year, and then you identify who the backup is. So people that are on the net now know the two stations that they'll be dealing with. And then you announce the time that you're starting. And all this is good just for documentation. So then purpose of this net is to provide communications during periods of emergency through the facilities of the K3JRW repeater and 442.525 plus offset 173.8 tone. Now any ham that is familiar with repeater operations can take that information and join our net. Let's say they're listening on a scanner. With this information, they'll be able to program the radio to participate in the net. And the repeater is located at the Treasure Lake Church, and that gives people not familiar with us that may be trying to check in a feel for where the repeater is located, so they know if they have the ability to make contact or not. All licensed amateurs invited to participate in the net. Goes on, and then here's an important thing. If anyone becomes aware of information or an emergency requiring action by the net, please call break and your call sign. And then what net control will do then is if something's going on at a convenient point, they'll stop and give recognition to the call sign that asked for the break, and then take that information that the call sign wants to pass along. So that's how you would interject yourself into the net to pass information if you've learned something that needs to go to everybody. And then have an opportunity here to check if anybody has emergency priority traffic, and then a chance for people to make announcements if it's needed at that time. And then you're ready for check-ins. Okay, so when you do the check-ins, when you start, you want to identify yourself again with your name and call sign. And the check-ins will be taken first by roster and then followed by check-ins of ham operators not on the roster. So we'll check in the Treasure Lake group list and then call for other ones. You're asking them to give their full call sign and name and QTH where they're located. So we'll do the roster check-ins first, then other check-ins. And here's the roster for the ham group, and you can use this mark here to check in. If somebody checks in, you can just put a check mark there, and when they leave, you can check them out on this side. This is one reason I think it's a good idea to use a new packet of documents when you restart the net. So the other thing that's here is I've included the license for each person. For example, anybody that's a technician, you wouldn't expect them to be able to monitor an HF station or communicate on the HF bands. And it's just kind of good to know who can do what. And then you just go through the check-in and see who's all there. And once you're done with that, then you make a call for stations that want to check in but haven't been called. And this is the page that you can do that type of thing. So I made the room a little wider because this will be filled in by hand probably. And so you call for check-ins, and then you put the last name and then the first name and the call sign, because that's usually how I identify people. What type of license they have. You probably don't need to do this, but if you want to, you could put that in, and then you could check them in. And then if you need multiple copies of this, you can just continue on. But 20, pretty good number. So this will probably take care of you. Then we'll get into the net procedure. So you got everybody checked in, and then you go start the net. And you report that net control will echo all received reports, confirm accuracy. So somebody calls in, it says something, net control's writing it down, and they'll
According
repeat
to
it.
Reuters, Democrats maintain their majority control of the Senate, while
Sorry about that. That was Alexa telling me something I had absolutely no interest in. It's not always great being surrounded by technology. Where was I? Net control. Okay, so net control is going to echo back everything they hear to the sending station, and then the sending station needs to confirm that we have it correct. And then I think it's a good idea for net control to conduct a roll call of all check-ins, say at 15 to 30-minute intervals. Just kind of be up to net control how frequently they think they need to do that. But people leave and we don't know about it. That would be a good way to check on it. And you also ask people if they are going off the air to notify net control, so net control can check them out. Okay, this is one of the key things that needs to be done when we start up the net. The net control asks for volunteers to monitor and relay traffic for the 911 repeater and HF nets. Now, what we have here is a list of different stations that could and probably will have emergency information ongoing. So what we want to do, the first one, the highest priority, is to monitor the W3 CPA repeater. This is the 911 repeater, and we figure if anything is going to be coming out of local emergency services, we'll be picking it up here. So we ask for someone on the net to volunteer to monitor this repeater. So anybody that has a VHF radio would be able to do this, and you just put their name and call sign down. Second on the list of priority is the PEMA, which is the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, ACS, which is the Auxiliary Communication Services Western section. That's the section we're in. This would be the network that the state would pass information concerning the emergency on this frequency, 3.9905 lower sideband. You ask someone with an HF station to monitor that and report relevant information. Third priority is there's also an HF N-beams, that's narrow beam emergency management services, I think. But what it is, it's a digital net that kind of works like a teletype that is used for passing emergency traffic during emergencies. And it's located at 3.5830 megahertz with an offset of plus 150. Now, in order to monitor this, the HF station has to be set up with the FL Digi suite of programs for sending and receiving information and sending and receiving data files. So if you have someone that's capable of doing this, they get this assignment. The fourth one's the Western Pennsylvania Aries voice net at this frequency. Then the fifth one would be the PEMA ACS, or Auxiliary Communication Services for Central Pennsylvania. PEMA is divided the state up into three sections: Western, Central, and Eastern. So Western, I think, starts about where we're at, maybe Center County, and then to the east is the central section. So that would be a good one to monitor. And then they use the same frequency. Now, I'm not sure how this would work, but I know the PEMA group does a statewide net once a month, and they use the same frequency that the ACS Central has. So obviously they probably wouldn't be conducting both nets, but one or the other of these nets would be operating that we'd want to monitor. Now, the reason we've got a priority list here is if, say, we only have 3 people that are capable of doing this, then you want to make sure that we're covering the 3 most critical sources. And if you get a 4th person, you can add this one. So you just try to get as many people monitoring this as available. Then the other thing you ask is that all others that haven't taken these assignments should monitor available commercial news outlets, or if they have a scanner, that would be a good thing to monitor. And then if they do get relevant information, pass it along to net control. And the net control will do periodic information summaries, whether it's on the top of the hour or I don't know, whatever seems to make sense. That's something net control and the group's going to have to figure out on the spot. And then you just continue to monitor. The operation of the net is just continue monitoring all these sources, collecting the information and passing it along through the repeater so that everybody knows what's going on, at least the best that we can figure at that point in time. And then if you reach the point where the net's no longer needed, you can just close the net and announce that when the next net would be. Say you're on an hourly schedule, you just announce, close the net here and say, okay, we'll be back at 3 p.m. local time, and start the next net. So that's kind of how it ought to work. Take a look at the more of the pages. There's 3 pages of this sheet in the PDF file where net control and the backup and actually anybody that's on the net may want to do this as well. When someone's recognized by net control that has information, you note their call sign, the time they were on the air, and then just write down whatever the information or announcement or emergency might be. So this is how you build the log of communications that happened during the event. So, as I mentioned, just for ongoing net operations, as things are moving along, net control will continue to monitor, log, and report incoming information. If there's need to transmit information externally out of the net, let's say we want to get a message about a problem to PEMA, net control will direct that, and that would go out through an HF station to one of the PEMA ACS networks that we're monitoring. The backup monitors and logs all the incoming information as the net control does, and then he or she also fills in for net control as needed. So if net control has to leave for whatever reason, maybe particularly on a long duration emergency, this would be fairly common. Then the backup will fill in for net control, perform these functions, and ask for someone to act as backup for them when this happens. So that way you're always in a position where we have a net control and a backup operating. And just going back to this infrastructure, I think this the reason this is set up this way is if you look at it, essentially every bit of information, either incoming or outgoing, is going to go through this repeater. Whether it's coming from PEMA or ARES or the 911 repeater, it'll be echoed through our repeater to all the other stations, and ultimately down the road to the GMRS network. Any information from any of these stations that needs to be relayed out is going to go through this repeater. So what this does is this approach allows anyone that can monitor this repeater, which is fairly easy to do with a little planning ahead, can be in touch with our emergency communications group. And we'll see how all this works out again on Saturday. So this is K3SKS, and I'll be clear.